August 24th, 79 AD. The Roman city of Pompeii had approximately 11,000 residents. They were going about their morning, visiting the market, working in the bakeries, conducting business in the forum, when the volcano above them began to tremble. By the following morning, the entire city was buried under 4 to 6 meters of volcanic ash and pumice. Almost everyone who had not already fled was dead. Pompeii would not be rediscovered for more than 1,500 years. When archaeologists finally excavated it, they found the casts of people who had been frozen in their final moments. A mother shielding her child, a man covering his face, a dog curled on its chain. That eruption was from Mount Vesuvius. And Vesuvius, as terrifying as it was not even the biggest volcanic system in the region. 20 kilometers to the west of where Pompeii stood, buried beneath the western suburbs of modern Naples and stretching out under the Bay of Pozzuoli, sits a volcanic system 12 by 15 kilometers wide that makes Vesuvius look like a footnote. You cannot see it the way you can see Vesuvius, because it does not have a visible mountain peak. It is a caldera, a vast sunken depression formed when a colossal eruption 39,000 years ago was so powerful that the ground above the magma chamber simply collapsed inward. Its name is Campi Flegrei. In Italian, that means the burning fields. Right now, 500,000 people live inside its caldera. More than 3 million people live in the surrounding area that would be in the impact zone if it erupted. It has been in a state of accelerating continuous unrest since 2005. The ground inside the caldera has risen by 140 centimeters, nearly 5 feet, since that year, driven by magmatic gases and fluids moving beneath the surface. Hundreds of small earthquakes rattle the region every month. Buildings in the city of Pozzuoli have cracked. Streets buckle, the harbor floor keeps rising and has to be periodically dredged. And a new scientific model published in peer-reviewed research and confirmed by the Italian National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology projects that the current self-reinforcing pattern of acceleration could reach a critical transition, a breaking point, around 2030 to 2034. This is not Yellowstone. Yellowstone gets all the coverage. Campi Flegrei gets almost none, despite the fact that it is sitting directly underneath one of the most densely populated regions in Europe, has been erupting the ground continuously for 21 years, and is now on a modeled trajectory toward a structural breaking point in the next decade. That is what we are talking about today. It is Monday, July 14th, 2026, and today Planet Brief is doing something we should have done a while ago, giving Campi Flegrei the full, honest, data-grounded coverage it deserves. This is the volcanic system that most people have never heard of, that is demonstrably more dangerous to more people than Yellowstone, and that is right now showing the most sustained and accelerating signs of unrest of any supervolcanic system on Earth. Let's go through all of it. Let me start with a direct comparison between Campi Flegrei and Yellowstone, because the title of this video makes a strong claim, and that claim deserves to be substantiated. Yellowstone is the famous one. It gets the documentaries, the news cycles, the earthquake swarm alerts, the endless speculation about when it will blow. The Yellowstone supervolcano sits beneath a national park in Wyoming, its caldera measuring roughly 55 by 72 kilometers. Its last major supereruption was 640,000 years ago. The USGS has been very consistent on this. The probability of a Yellowstone supereruption in any given year is approximately 1 in 730,000. The magma chamber beneath Yellowstone is mostly solid. Only about 5 to 15% of it is molten. Yellowstone is unquestionably a volcanic system worth monitoring. It is not a near-term threat. Campi Flegrei is different in several specific and important ways. First, it is far more densely populated. Yellowstone sits beneath a national park. Campi Flegrei sits beneath Naples, a metropolitan area of more than 3 million people with 500,000 living directly inside the caldera itself. When scientists and civil protection agencies talk about Campi Flegrei, they are talking about a potential mass casualty event in one of Europe's largest cities, not an eruption in a wilderness area. Second, it erupted far more recently. Yellowstone's last significant eruptive activity was tens of thousands of years ago. Campi Flegrei last erupted in 1538, fewer than 500 years ago, in an event that lasted 2 years and formed a new hill called Monte Nuovo. That eruption was preceded by an uplift pattern between 1400 and 1536 that researchers have specifically noted resembles the current situation. Third, it is actively and measurably unrestful right now in a way Yellowstone is not. Yellowstone has its earthquake swarms and hydrothermal activity that make headlines. Campi Flegrei has 140 centimeters of documented ground uplift since 2005, hundreds of earthquakes every month, and a modeled trajectory toward a structural breaking point. These are not equivalent situations. And fourth, and this is the one that the scientific literature keeps coming back to, the last major eruption of Campi Flegrei, 39,000 years ago, produced something called the Campanian ignimbrite. It was one of the largest volcanic eruptions in European history. It released approximately 300 cubic kilometers of material, The ash from that eruption has been found across an enormous swath of Europe and the Mediterranean. Some researchers have connected the companion Ignimbrite eruption to the extinction of Neanderthals in Europe, though that connection remains scientifically debated. Yellowstone's largest eruption, 1 million years ago, produced 2,450 cubic kilometers. Larger, but that was 1 million years ago. The question of which system poses a nearer-term risk to human life is not close. Here is the specific picture of what Campi Flegrei is doing right now, as documented by the Italian National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology, INGV, and by researchers studying the system. The volcano live. Come February 2026, status update documented the current situation precisely. Campi Flegrei remains in a state of unrest at yellow alert level. That is the second of 4 alert levels in Italy's volcanic warning system, above the base green level, but below the elevated orange and red levels. The yellow alert has been in place continuously since 2012. The ground uplift is continuing at approximately 1 centimeter per month in the Pozzuoli area. Gas temperatures and carbon dioxide flux remain high but stable. The NGV observatory continues daily monitoring. The seismic picture is more active. Between February 23rd and March 1st, 2026, the seismographs recorded approximately 70 earthquakes in a single week. The magnitudes ranged up to M3. 5. The largest recent earthquake was a magnitude 4.6 on June 30th, 2025. Felt across Naples, causing minor structural damage. 1 centimeter per month of ground rise, sustained for over a year, adds up fast. The cumulative uplift since 2005 has reached 140 centimeters, nearly 5 feet. In Pozzuoli, the harbor city at the heart of the caldera, that ground rise is visible and tangible. Buildings have cracked, streets have buckled. The harbor floor has risen to the point where it requires periodic dredging just to remain navigable. And here's the thing about bradyseism, the technical term for this kind of slow, pulsing ground rise and fall that Campi Flegrei has been doing for centuries. That makes the current episode different from previous ones. Campi Flegrei has experienced major uplift episodes before, in the 1950s to 1952, in 1969 to 1972, in 1982 to 1984, a major crisis that required the evacuation of 40,000 people from Pozzuoli. Each of those episodes caused alarm and then subsided. And after each one, people breathed a sigh of relief and concluded that Campi Flegrei had been doing this for centuries without erupting and would probably continue doing so. But a 2023 study published in Communications, Earth, and Environment, and confirmed by subsequent research, identified something that changes that historical pattern fundamentally. The study analyzed all 4 of the major uplift episodes since 1950 together, rather than treating each one as independent. The conclusion was alarming. Each uplift episode has left the caldera's crust progressively more fractured and weakened than before. The crust is not recovering between episodes. It is accumulating damage. The rupture sequence, the cracking of the rock above the magmatic system that has to happen before an eruption can occur, has been developing progressively across all 4 episodes since 1950. The research team, led by Christopher Kilburn of University College London, stated directly in their 2017 Nature Communications paper that first identified this progressive rupture pattern. They highlight the need to raise awareness among vulnerable communities, that a lack of eruption during recent emergencies cannot be used to infer that an eruption is also unlikely during a future crisis. In plain terms, the fact that Campi Flegrei has not erupted during previous crises does not mean it will not erupt during this one. The crust is weaker now than it was during the 1982 to 1984 crisis. It is weaker now than it was during any previous episode, and it is continuing to weaken. Here is the piece of the Campi Flegrei story that is most important for understanding what scientists are specifically warning about right now, and I want to explain it carefully because the numbers matter and the caveats matter equally. A research team led by Davide Zaccagnino, a postdoctoral researcher at the Southern University of Science and Technology, published a study applying physics-based models to the type of acceleration observed at Campi Flegrei. The key distinction they identified is between 2 types of acceleration. In ordinary exponential acceleration, activity increases at a fixed rate, compounding over time, but not inherently self-amplifying. In what physicists call a finite time singularity, the speed of the acceleration itself is growing. The system is not just accelerating. It is accelerating faster and faster in a self-reinforcing cycle that mathematically leads to a specific breaking point. Their analysis found that Campi Flegrei's seismic and ground deformation behavior since 2005 fits the finite time singularity pattern, not simple exponential growth. This distinction is crucial for understanding the trajectory. Zaccagnino and his colleagues' modeling suggests that the current self-reinforcing pattern could persist until approximately 2030 to 2034, at which point the system is projected to reach what the study calls a breaking point. Now I want to be very clear about what breaking point means in this context, because this is where the science gets genuinely nuanced. Zaccagnino said directly, "Our paper identifies when the system is likely to reach a breaking point, but it cannot determine what will happen at that breaking point with the current data. Not an eruption. A breaking point. Those are different things. When the crust breaks, multiple outcomes are possible. The most likely is an escalation of the current unrest, stronger earthquakes, faster ground rise, potentially triggering an evacuation of the 500,000 people in the caldera's red zone. A less likely but possible outcome is the crust fracturing in a way that allows magma to reach the surface, an eruption. The researchers explicitly listed other forms of structural transition as also possible. The Volcano DB analysis published in May 2026 was precise about the current official status. INGV classifies the system as in a phase of accelerating unrest. No eruption is imminent. Italian Civil Protection maintains a yellow alert. The red zone evacuation plan covers approximately 500,000 people. Monitoring by INGV continues daily, and the Prevention Web analysis published in February 2026 added the critical context about why this volcanic system is particularly difficult to manage. The hazards at Campi Flegrei rarely follow simple patterns. They overlap, cascade, or unfold independently, challenging scientists, authorities, and communities alike. Land uplift, earthquake swarms, potentially toxic gas emissions, and the remote but catastrophic possibility of an eruption all coexist and interact. Here's the piece of the Campi Flegrei story that gets the least coverage of any aspect of this volcanic system, and that, in many ways, is the most immediately dangerous. Campi Flegrei is not just a magmatic system. It is a hydrothermal system. Beneath the caldera, a complex network of hot water and gas, primarily carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, percolates through the fractured rock. These gases emit continuously from fumaroles and through diffuse ground emissions across the entire caldera. At elevated temperatures and concentrations, they are toxic to humans and animals. The Solfatara crater, the most active fumarolic zone in the caldera, located just 2 kilometers from the center of Pozzuoli, regularly reaches temperatures of 160 degrees Celsius at the main fumarole. Hydrogen sulfide concentrations at times make the area hazardous without respiratory protection. In September 2017, a family of 3 tourists, a father, mother, and their young son, died at Solfatara when they fell into a fumarolic area and were overcome by gases before rescuers could reach them. The crater has been closed to visitors since. As ground uplift continues and the crust weakens and fractures further, the pathways for these gases to reach the surface become more numerous and more open. The gas flux from Campi Flegrei, the total amount of volcanic gas being emitted, has been documented as high and stable by the INGV. As those pathways widen, that flux has the potential to increase. And a sudden large release of carbon dioxide, which is heavier than air in pools and low-lying areas, from a newly opened fracture under the caldera, is a life-threatening event that can occur without any preceding volcanic eruption. This is not a theoretical concern. It happened at Lake Nyos in Cameroon in 1986, when a sudden release of dissolved carbon dioxide from the lake killed approximately 1,800 people in the surrounding villages. The Campi Flegrei system is not a lake. It operates through a different mechanism. But the underlying physics of dense gas pooling in low-lying areas after a sudden release is the same. And the population density in and around the Campi Flegrei caldera is incomparably higher than the villages around Lake Nyos were. The Prevention Web study described the multi-risk management challenge of Campi Flegrei as land uplift, swarms of earthquakes, potentially toxic gas emissions, and the remote but catastrophic possibility of an eruption coexist. Sometimes these hazards occur and unfold independently. Sometimes they cascade, one triggering another. That cascading potential is what makes Campi Flegrei such a uniquely complex and dangerous volcanic system to live next to. Here is something that deserves to be said directly. Yellowstone gets extensive coverage every time there is an earthquake swarm, every time a new scientific paper comes out, every time the ground deforms slightly in one direction or another. The stories write themselves. Yellowstone isn't a famous national park. It has a dramatic reputation. It has been the subject of disaster films, and its potential consequences for the United States are enormous. Those stories are not wrong to run. Yellowstone is worth monitoring. But the gap between the coverage that Yellowstone receives and the coverage that Campi Flegrei receives is not proportional to the relative risk these systems present to human life in the near and medium term. In the time frame that matters for people alive today, the next decade to the next few generations, Campi Flegrei is demonstrably more active, closer to a structural breaking point as modeled by current research, directly underneath 3 million people, and has erupted within the last 500 years. Part of the coverage gap is geographic. Campi Flegrei is in Italy, and American media naturally focuses more heavily on domestic threats. Part of it is visual. Yellowstone's geysers and hot springs make for compelling television in a way that a caldera hidden underneath an Italian city does not. And part of it is historical. Yellowstone has been in the popular imagination as a supervolcanic threat since the late 1990s and early 2000s, when the scale of its magma chamber was first widely communicated, and that narrative has momentum. But the practical consequence of that coverage gap is that the 3 million people who live in the Naples region go about their daily lives with Campi Flegrei largely as background noise rather than an active topic of public awareness. The evacuation plans exist. The monitoring is continuous. The INGV is excellent at what it does. But the broader public understanding of what is actually happening beneath the burning fields and what the modeled trajectory toward a 2030 to 2034 breaking point means is far below what it would be if this system were located somewhere with more English language media attention. Here's the practical piece of this that I want to make sure is clearly understood, because the Italian Civil Protection has actually done a great deal of work on this problem, and it deserves credit and scrutiny. The Campi Flegrei red zone, the area of highest immediate volcanic risk, covers approximately 500,000 people living inside the caldera boundary. The evacuation plan for these 500,000 people involves moving them to designated reception areas across Italy in a coordinated operation triggered by a specific alert level change from yellow to orange or orange to red. An emergency exercise carried out in September 2023 tested this evacuation scenario. The exercise involved coordination across multiple Italian regions and municipalities, testing the logistics of moving 500,000 people out of the caldera under a volcanic emergency timeline. The exercise revealed both the strengths of the plan and the challenges, including the difficulty of communicating urgency without causing panic, the complexity of evacuating car-free and mobility-limited residents, and the transportation infrastructure bottlenecks in and around the Naples area. The broader orange zone, which includes additional areas of Naples and surrounding communities that would face serious risk from a significant eruption, covers populations much larger than the 500,000 in the red zone. Coordinating the movement of potentially millions of people out of the Naples metropolitan area in response to a volcanic emergency, through a city already known for its traffic congestion and narrow historic streets, is one of the most complex civilian evacuation scenarios in Europe. This is not to say the plan does not exist or is not being worked on. It is to say that the challenge is genuinely enormous, and that the modeled trajectory toward a breaking point in 2030 to 2034 means the time available to refine and improve that plan is finite. Let me connect Campi Flegrei to the broader context of what we have been covering at Planet Brief, because I think it is part of an important larger picture. This week alone, Planet Brief has covered the Venezuela earthquake doublet that has killed nearly 4,000 people and left nearly 50,000 unaccounted for. We covered the Garlock Fault and San Andreas stress levels at their highest in 1,000 years. We covered the Vancouver Island Cascadia subduction zone study, finding seafloor that has dropped 5 kilometers along a fault described as close to breaking. We covered the Thwaites Glacier, whose ice shelf is expected to collapse this year. And now Campi Flegrei, on a modeled trajectory toward a structural breaking point between 2030 and 2034. None of these events are connected in any single causal chain. They are happening on separate geological systems in separate parts of the world. The planet is not catastrophically breaking apart in some coordinated fashion. What these stories collectively represent is the normal, but constantly humbling, scale of geological and atmospheric processes that operate on this planet continuously, at timescales and magnitudes that dwarf anything in human experience. The same geological forces that built the mountains, carved the ocean basins, and made the continents their current shapes are the ones producing the Venezuela doublet, the Garlock stress loading, the Cascadia structural changes, and the Campi Flegrei unrest. Human civilization has been built on the assumption, mostly warranted over the last several thousand years, that these processes would remain in the background. That assumption is not broken, but it is being tested in a period when our scientific monitoring has become good enough to see what is actually happening in real time. And what is happening in real time, across multiple systems simultaneously, is significant. Let me close this section with the practical reality for the people who actually live in the Campi Flegrei caldera, because I think it is easy to discuss this system in abstract geological terms and lose sight of what it means to be a human being living inside it. The residents of Pozzuoli have been living with Bradycism, the ground rising and sinking beneath them, for their entire lives. Their grandparents lived with it. Their great-grandparents lived with it. The ancient Romans built temples on this ground that are now partially submerged and partially emerged, depending on the phase of the Bradycism cycle, and those temples have been a tourist attraction for centuries. Living inside Campi Flegrei is the cultural and historical reality of this region. The Flegreian fields are where the ancient Romans believed the entrance to the underworld was located. They built the place Virgil described as Avernus, the bird-killing lake with sulfurous vapors, right here. They knew what they were living next to. But the 2030 to 2034 breaking point projection is not a normal part of the historical cycle of life at Campi Flegrei. The previous crises, the 1950s, the 1969 to 1972 uplift, the 1982 to 1984 crisis that evacuated 40,000 people, none of those had the specific fingerprint of a finite-time singularity acceleration that the current unrest has been showing since 2005. The crust under the caldera has never been weaker than it is right now since the system last erupted in 1538, and the research community monitoring this system has moved over the past decade from discussing the possibility of a future eruption in very cautious terms to discussing the approach to a structural breaking point with increasing specificity and confidence. The Italian Civil Protection's Yellow Alert is not nothing. It means continuous monitoring, continuous preparation, and the maintenance of the evacuation plans that would move 500,000 people out of the caldera if the situation escalates. The INGV scientists who monitor Campi Flegrei are among the best volcanic monitoring scientists in the world. They know the system intimately, and they are watching it every day. But the people of Naples and Pozzuoli, and the international community that shares the planet with them, deserve to understand clearly that Campi Flegrei is not a geological curiosity. It is an active, accelerating, documented, modeled threat. It is demonstrably closer to a potential structural transition than Yellowstone, and it is sitting beneath 3 million people. That is the story that deserves to be told as clearly as any story about Yellowstone. There is something far worse than Yellowstone. Its name is Campi Flegrei, the burning fields of Italy. It is a 12 by 15 kilometer caldera sitting directly beneath the western suburbs of Naples and the city of Pozzuoli, home to 500,000 people within the caldera and 3 million in the surrounding region. It has been in continuous, documented accelerating unrest since 2005. The ground has risen 140 centimeters since that year. Hundreds of earthquakes rattle the system every month. The largest recent earthquake, a magnitude 4.6 on June 30th, 2025, was felt across Naples. Buildings in Pozzuoli have cracked. Streets buckle. The harbor floor keeps rising. Peer-reviewed research published in Communications, Earth, and Environment, and confirmed by subsequent modeling, has shown that the caldera's crust has been progressively weakening across 4 uplift episodes since 1950. It is not recovering between episodes. A physics-based model published by Davide Zaccagnino and colleagues identifies the current acceleration as a finite-time singularity. A self-reinforcing pattern that their modeling suggests could reach a structural breaking point around 2030 to 2034. They are explicit that this breaking point could take multiple forms, with an eruption being one possibility and escalating structural transition being another. INGV classifies the system as in a phase of accelerating unrest. The Yellow Alert is maintained. The evacuation plan for 500,000 people in the red zone exists. No eruption is imminent. But the 79 AD eruption of Vesuvius, 20 kilometers away, buried an entire city in hours. The companion ignimbrite eruption from Campi Flegrei itself, 39,000 years ago, produced 300 cubic kilometers of material and may have contributed to the extinction of Neanderthals in Europe. The ground is rising again. The crust is weakening again. That is what is coming back.